Hello, everyone, and welcome to VAC Roundtable number 72 with Anton Harb and Eryck Stamper from the American Legion Post 426. We're continuing our conversation with those around us who are active and, doing what needs to be done, which is something that we firmly believe in. We're also going to have a conversation about a unique situation that's happening online and in Arizona regarding, the American Legion Post, because as you know, um, we have unique situation, regarding cannabis and being in the military. And we have tried to engage our VSOs, veteran service organizations, for those who aren't familiar. And that can be challenging, needless to say. So, very proud to have Anton and Eryck here tonight. Basically, going to start off and go right into our first question. And I'm going to go start off with you, Anton, and then go to you, Eryck. Um, how did you originally come to cannabis?
Well, I kind of had a unique path to cannabis. In order to kind of get to that stage, I need to kind of give a little bit of my background. So, I'm a former Army officer. I was a field artillery officer. I served in Operation Iraqi Freedom in 2005, and ended up actually getting sick in Iraq. I got medevaced out, and eventually ended up getting retired out of the military. Post-military, I have a bachelor's degree in criminal justice. So the natural path for, a former reconnaissance, forward observer with a criminal justice degree was naturally law enforcement. And for me, after getting out of the military and struggling with post-traumatic stress, and I'm a cancer survivor in the burn pits in Iraq. I had a lot of health issues, but still managed to get into law enforcement. And my path initially started as a Border Patrol agent with Homeland Security. I worked down in Sonoyta, Arizona, next to Nogales, for a little while. And after the irony I tell of the story is that my Border Patrol career, if you will, ended after I slipped and fell down a mountain carrying a 50-pound bundle of cannabis. That was kind of a unique part of my story, right? So I injured my knee, and I wanted off the border. So I ended up going to Boston and ended up getting a special agent position with a little known agency called the Treasury Inspector General for Tax Administration. They do a lot of the internal affairs work for the IRS. And they do a lot of like domestic extremism type casework. Eventually, I got out of there and was picked up by the ATF and became a special agent with the ATF and was assigned to Detroit. And during that time, I served my time as an undercover special agent in Detroit, which, as anybody can imagine, was um, high paced, if you will, at times. And at the time, I was dealing still with health issues, still dealing with post traumatic stress, started dealing with chronic pain issues, went to the VA, and within a year, the VA had me on fentanyl, oxycodone, Xanax, and I had this cocktail of medications that there's parts of 2014, 15, 16. I don't even remember, right? And this path kind of doing this undercover work and being on all these medications, and it was this kind of wild time in my life. But what eventually had happened were the opiates that the VA had me on injured the nerve in my stomach, and I wasn't able to eat. I was always throwing up. I was always nauseous. I was still working. I was trying to raise a family, and that put me in a unique position because in Michigan we passed our medical law back in 2008, and being a federal law enforcement officer, I really knew it was a huge no-no. But uh, I got my card while I was on the job. Actually, I went and got my medical card, and I had never tried it. I had never tried cannabis in any capacity. I was in my 30s at that time, and it was this kind of path that I led to, because it was still really under the radar here in Michigan. We didn't have a dispensary system set up. We were still dealing with the caregiver system predominantly, and I managed to get a hold of a little bit of flower, and I smoked it, and I was sleeping, and now I was eating. I wasn't nauseous anymore, and now I was able to actually cut out I got off of the opiates. I got off of actually almost all of the medications I was prescribed at that time by the VA. Still in a position knowing that if I got caught by the federal government, my career was going to be over. So it was kind of a choice I had to make between quality of life and being there for my family and a job. And I chose I obviously, it was an easy decision. So that is how I initially got into cannabis. I did in 2016, after I was undercover for a while, and it led to a suicide attempt. And after my suicide attempt it was the end of my career. I just couldn't do the job anymore, and that led me into cannabis activism. But yeah, my first time was in my 30s as a special agent for the ATF. That was my first experience with cannabis, and thank God for it.
Wow, that's rather unique. I was a gun bunny myself, 13 Bravo, so thank you
Cool.
very much. If you were
Cool.
an observer, we much love for you guys, and our apologies for putting those little razor blades in between the fuse and giving you guys a little sphincter pull, as we would call that. All right, well, thank you very much, Anton. Eryck, tell us about your story and how did you originally come to cannabis? You need to unmute yourself, though.
So again, thank you, MTN, and thank you, Veterans Action Council. First and foremost, working with you guys over the last few years, it's been amazing to see the effort and work you're doing from the local, state, federal, and even at the international level. So that is tremendous. And the amount of work you're doing daily to help support veterans and cannabis and psychedelic reform, reducing those suicide numbers that we continue to see rising, um, you know, is critical. So thank you all very much. We salute you for that. My journey a little bit kind of started. It ended very similar to Anton, believe it or not. With the criminal justice degree, I had aspirations for Homeland Security and Border Patrol myself after the military, but really it got started early on for me. Early on in middle school, coming up in Baltimore City, very similar to Detroit. It's kind of a rough place to grow up. A lot of hardships, a lot of depression, a lot of segregation, and just a lot of issues, drug problems included. So I kind of started early on just as experimenting, in the early teens, with friends, partying, not knowing that there was still a holistic effect, even at such a young age, honestly. I've seen a lot of programs over the last years supporting youth and cannabis as well, including my home state of Maryland. So I joined at the early age of 17. I had to take the recruiter down to the bar where my mother worked at as a bartender. After they signed me away about the age of 17, early on before just 18, I joined the delayed entry program. So that gave me, a good almost a year as I was still in high school to go to the recruiters, do military training, even before the military, completed the basic military requirements and all the other things, learned how to march, do formations, and that's even before the military. So at the moment of truth, believe it or not, we all know the military here, the moment of truth, they did a urinalysis on me and I got a positive piss test, so, we went through that whole waiver process back in the day. The military was needing sailors to come in just like they do now. We have a major shortfall of Navy, about 40,000 short just this year alone, sidebar. But at the time they were needing sailors. So I was able to get in under a drug waiver for cannabis. Early on, I started from the E1, worked my way all the way up. Near the middle of my career, I even became a urinalysis program coordinator myself. So I was testing, analyzing, submitting urinalysis results to the drug lab. And even at that time, I was proud of the work I was doing, honestly. And I thought I was doing the right thing by working to discharge veterans with drugs as well as cannabis in their systems. Only after the military did I realize we started having a lot of people being discharged for cannabis, like some of the folks you hear at some of these meetings. And so I apologize as I was active duty, as I was going through due diligence and getting you out of there. In hindsight, I learned a lot during that process, to be honest with you, about addiction, about drugs, about veterans, about active duty mainly, and in the drug program. So I like Anton working, in the drug environment. So near the end of my military, Desert Shield, Desert Storm type of work, Iraqi freedom, a lot of relief efforts around the globe, mostly Pacific theater. I didn't realize I developed a lot of these problems. So as I was getting out to the military, it was a major struggle for me. I did all the great military things, the transition assistance, the training, all the wonderful things that, they do now for our transitioning veterans. But what I didn't know is I had some serious mental health problems, and that was understood working through the Veterans Administration. I was going to a lot of appointments. I couldn't maintain a job. I had quite a few jobs at the beginning. I was on the cocktail as well for, one thing or another, from mental to physical ailments. And, I transitioned to cannabis early on, just after retirement. And it allowed me as well to come off all the medications. And my activism really started shortly thereafter. I was going to a veterans agricultural therapeutic program, and I learned Maryland had a brand new industrial hemp program. This is around the same time I was engaging in cannabis. It was illegal in Maryland when I started. I started working with a group called Maryland NORML. NORML is the national organization for the reform of marijuana laws. Every state has one, and there's a national in DC. So I learned a lot about cannabis through NORML, learned a lot about advocacy, fighting for veterans and patient rights in the state of Maryland. Shortly after that, I became their veterans outreach coordinator. So I started talking to a lot of veterans in Maryland about cannabis. And we transitioned to a medical state around that same time through a lot of the advocacy efforts. From there, I formed the Maryland Hemp Exchange with True Industrial Hemp, trying to transition some of the farmers to true industrial hemp-based products, very heavy into construction like hempcrete and hemp wood, things of that nature. Concurrently, I opened up my own nonprofit, founded a group called Veterans Initiative 22. They're kind of twofold: hiring business practices for veterans, family and first responders in the cannabis space, alternative holistic healthcare space. At the same time, as the brand new industry developed in Maryland with cannabis, I engaged right away with our leadership. I got a job at a dispensary. Leadership asked me, Eryck, what are we going to do with our veterans? We want to make sure there's a discount for you guys. The owner's father was military, and his whole family had engagements with our military. And so I actually thought about this for a while and knew of a lot of different groups. And at that time, we were losing 22 veterans a day. That's what we knew. That's what was being reported. And that's kind of the theme a lot of us are going off now, is 22 plus a day. And so, as this business and industry in Maryland was forming, I asked if we could do a 22% discount for veterans. I was a little shocked. It was the biggest discount in the state for patients, as well as for even staff employees. Sometimes agents get discounts as well. So the veterans in Maryland now, out of about 113, there's some new initiatives in place for new dispensaries. About 75 of them are doing a 22% or greater on medical cannabis for our veterans. Like Anton working hard in Michigan, we were working hard in Maryland and got the commission engaged. We sat on a lot of the Maryland Medical Commission meetings, talking about veterans and talking about patient rights, responsibilities. We developed a lot of programming through the state. And now we have free medical evaluations in the state of Maryland through a small group of practitioners. And the license fee through the state of Maryland is now all set through, like Anton, the state program. So there's a fund that has been created in the state. I'm new to West Virginia. I've only been here about 6 months. I thought I was actually getting out of the cannabis space. You know, I thought I was beginning to get some of that burnout that a lot of us feel. Like you all here and many others that I was introduced to early on, you guys are really the OGs of cannabis. You're leading from the top, you know, like we talked about the international levels and below, supporting our veterans. So here in West Virginia, we had a real difficult program, and it somewhat got me engaged again. So I'm now the West Virginia director of Veterans Initiative 22. And so not just that, you know, I work collectively with a lot of the nonprofits looking to support our veterans in general, and therapeutic beekeeping as well as agriculture. So, you know, I landed myself with American Legion just about a year ago, and just recently became a life member. The work that I feel that we're doing at 462 is just incredible. And I think we're going to talk about some of that just here in a little bit. So I know that's kind of long-winded, but there's the history.
Well, thank you for that. And of course, I was in the West Virginia Army National Guard. So, in WVU. So, again, special place in my heart for that. But I have to ask you, since you said you were the pee guy, did you have to stand there for hours on end and watch guys pee?
Actually, early on in my like E5, E4 days, we were the observers. Later on, I was able to assign observers. So I had the privilege to get some officers to observe as well as enlisted, obviously. So many samples. No, I did not personally test them to make sure they were true.
Wasn't gonna go there, but yeah, I remember going through Pittsburgh, and yeah, it was the first time I ever had a guy stand there and watch me pee in a cup. I was like, wow, that was weird. He's like, get used to it, kid. Like, all right. Well, with that, we'll go to our next question, which will be Councilmember Peggy Jones. Councilmember Jones.
Thank you, Tim. My question is, what drives your passion for the advocacy work that you pursue?
Anton, let's start with you.
All right. What drives my passion? I guess the main driving force is my own personal testimony that I'm able to share in how cannabis and psychedelics have lent itself to my healing process. And I think when we live in a world that is driven by pharmaceutical medications, and where we're kind of, our thought process always goes to trying to deal with symptoms and not with the root of a lot of the problems that our veterans face. You know, I have a need to speak up about that and share my story and share how not only cannabis, but the cannabis community has, you know, I always say the two are intermingled. You know, cannabis is this wonderful plant that we have that breeds this network, this unbelievable network of people who have so much in common. Some of my best friends I've ever made in the veteran community have been over smoking a joint. And that's and those are some of my best friends for life. So when we talk about like what drives me personally, it was a need in Michigan when I had left government service. there were no resources. There were no veterans to connect with that I was able to find. And that was a problem for me because at the time when we did not have that dispensary system, finding a caregiver that you can trust, that can grow for you and be able to get your hands on products that would help, it takes a lot of trust and it takes a lot of networking as well, right? So I wanted to leverage, we have social media and we have all these different platforms to not only tell my story, but make sure other veterans know that there is a network out there and that there is a support system. And in Michigan, we're very lucky. We have some unbelievable advocates who have been advocating for decades for legalization, and those were the godfathers and godmothers of legalization here. So I kind of have a drive to not only assist veterans, but I want to honor those who have come before me and who have put a lot on the line, whether it was prison time for cannabis possession or whatever their charge was. The patients who we have families all over the state of Michigan who have lost their children because of cannabis use. And it still goes on to this day where CPS is still, hounding parents that are legally exercising their right to medicate. So I think the passion I also have with my government background, I found myself as kind of this middleman. I have a really good understanding and I know how to engage with government, but I also have a very good reputation and a very good network within the cannabis community. And what I found is the government and the cannabis community, sometimes there's a lot of miscommunication, and those miscommunications can lead to serious problems, especially at a policy level when we're dealing with policymakers who aren't able to maybe understand an issue or aren't willing to understand an issue. And I found, I've kind of become this bridge where I can take the issues of what the community is trying to raise and present them to government in a way that I know is able to get through to them. So it's really been a kind of a full circle thing for me.
Thank you, Anton. And Eryck, what drives your passion for the advocacy work you pursue?
Eryck, are you there? I think he had a freeze issue and he's jumping on. He'll be back in a sec on his phone. So we'll hold on that. He just sent me a message via messenger, so he just kind of locked up for a second. So we'll come back to him. But you're correct. There's quite a few mentors that are out there. One is, of course, that was Ben Maisel for us, the late Ben Maisel, and of course John Sinclair. Which of course that's the Godfather as far as I'm concerned, and yeah, so Michigan has always kind of led the way and have been the broad shoulders that a lot of us have stood on because, again, you had some brave people, but then, just from John's situation and, the hash bash and everything that, created a whole culture that came out of Michigan that's still ongoing to this day. So, Eryck's back. So, with that, Peggy, you want to ask Eryck again?
And welcome back, Eryck. What drives your passion for the advocacy work you pursue?
Thank you, and it's good to be back. Sorry for those technical difficulties. I'm gonna stay off of video until I get reconnected. But that passion, honestly, I feel has started from early on in my military career. I always joke and say Navy represents never again volunteer yourself. We love acronyms in the military. But I think early on in the military, I got a passion for just helping out the community, helping out my fellow shipmates in the Navy, and even helping out the family when I could. So that carried through my whole career until retirement. When I retired, I was really confused about what I was going to be doing in life and what direction I was headed. And so the veteran community just resonated so well with me. So it doesn't matter what I'm doing through volunteerism, or even if the opportunity for a salaried position has become available, the camaraderie, the teamwork, the ideas, visions, and everything that we've learned in the military, those common core values continue to resonate. So that passion is alive and well. And, it's just so much to be able to share and take care of our fellow veterans. That's the bottom line, taking care of veterans and their family. So,
Well, thank you for that. Next question will be from Councilmember Wade Laughter. Councilmember Laughter, speaking of Navy.
Yeah, hi there. Great introduction from both of you. Really a pleasure to meet you. I've certainly heard of your work. Would you walk us through this new American Legion post number 426 that you've created? I mean, how is it unique? What do you hope it can and will do? And how should our veterans cannabis stakeholder group, this group that's talking with you this afternoon, how should we see it in the context of our activist toolkit? Where do you see it fitting in? Help us out here. Thanks.
great. Anton, you want me to jump on that one real quick for you?
That's all you, brother. Go ahead.
Okay. First of all, I want to say Anton has recently been a member since January, and it's a pleasure to have him on board, just like, in fact, a few of you other members of the Veterans Action Council have become support, and we look forward to working closely with you. But I believe, we have a motto at the American Legion, and that's Veterans Strengthening America. And we do that in many different ways. We have a whole pillared system about how we do that. But so I just wanted to welcome you all to our American Legion Blue Sky Post 426. We're based out of Lakeside, Montana, and we're also probably, and I believe, the first virtual American Legion post out there. We designed this post early on with some great efforts through our cannabis leadership. And so if I may just spend a little time talking about the American Legion, if that's okay, and then graduate into the work that we're doing at our post that I think is, really profound in your question. So, most of us know a little bit about the history of the American Legion. We're just called the Legion, or AL for short. We are a nonprofit taking care of headquarters. Our headquarters is here in Indiana. And we're all over the world, actually. And we formed March 15th in 1990 in Paris, France. It was really created by thousands of officers and men of the American Expeditionary Force of the time in France. And we were first chartered in September 1919 by the U.S. Congress. If you didn't know, the American Legion plays a leading role supporting our original Service Members Readjustment Act of 1944, which we know was the GI Bill, and now the post 9/11 GI Bill. So thank you to our American Legion for that. And we work hand in hand with the veterans hospitals, clinics, and other organizations supporting our veterans and family. We're very active on Capitol Hill, and I'll tell you a little bit more about some of the work we've done at that level already. And so we are kind of a political activity advocacy lobbyist organization supporting our veterans' health. We've historically promoted Americanism, individual obligations to our active duty, our military, their family, the community, our state and nation as a whole. So specifically for your question, I think the main focus of Blue Sky Post 426 is to address the ongoing suicide and opiate crisis we're currently experiencing amongst all of our ranks. We've got some resolutions. Once I jump back online, I'll start sharing with you. But we are a group of key individuals who have dedicated ourselves to the post in support of that directly. Just last year, we were working hard in DC, and we've been able to have our first resolution passed. That resolution itself really discusses, using emerging therapies to address our veteran suicides. And that was just passed in October at the National Executive Committee convention. And we resolved at the highest levels from the American Legion, from the committee of the American Legion, that the American Legion urges Congress to pass legislation funding continued research and emergent therapies for veteran health, including but not limited to MDMA, psilocybin, a combination of therapy of ibogaine and 5-MeO-DMT, ketamine, and we also resolved and called the Department of Veteran Affairs to conduct research on these emerging therapies and expedite funding and training of our VA clinicians. Now, you already know there's been a lot of news the last few months about psychedelics and the Veterans Administration. So, that's a complete separate topic that, we can highlight briefly here. But this resolution that we had passed worked directly towards those goals. The early resolution from the American Legion was approved by the National Executive Committee, and that's resolution number 11. And that was actually passed back in 2016. So we've been talking about, medical cannabis for quite some time, and that was at the convention in Cincinnati. And really, that resolution calls on the DEA. They seem to be the only gatekeeper now of how we legalize cannabis in the future. So this calls on the DEA to license privately funded medical marijuana production operations in the United States, and also to enable safe and efficient cannabis research, and urging our Congress to remove from Schedule 1 and to reclassify it. And that resolution, again, was passed by the American Legion. And so those two, I think, are some of the predominating factors. We are currently working on our second resolution right now. And that resolution is actually going to be using the funds from the opiate crisis. There was a lawsuit and it was approved and passed. So we're looking to push the American Legion leadership to request some of those funds to be utilized for cannabis research, as well as the previous plant medicinal topics we talked about. And so right now that's running up our flagpole. That will take a little bit of time, and we're expecting to get some updates probably in about 3 months from now as we move that forward. And again, from our post alone, we're happy to say we were just nominated from Montana's Department of American Legion as Montana's post having the most membership so far in 2024. So just in the last few months, the support from all of you here is making us, get kind of some recognition, which will allow us to start pushing this message even further. We just wrapped up committee in DC, and they were heavy topics of this year were CBD and therapy. And so I know a direct answer to the question itself, again, would be our post is poised in a position with the right leadership in place to continue on the mission of cannabis research. We've got a little thing we're doing right now, reaching out to all of our fellow veteran service organizations, just like you guys here at the VAC, and try to work hand in hand to continue these efforts at the highest level. I feel strongly very soon, and I'm not wanting to get into politics, that we're really waiting just on the DEA right now, and all the other factors are kind of in place. But rest assured, the American Legion is leading, in my opinion, from our post, the front again on transition to alternative therapies for suicide prevention. I hope that kind of helps what we're up to. I'll also share, if you're interested, or the membership requirements. You just have to be a military member who serves. We're a little bit easier and more lenient than some of the other services that have more stringent requirements. We're about to open up our auxiliary to those also. So just keep that in mind, and I'll be sharing some of that literature, step core. And I hope that helped.
And this is for only American service people, correct?
Correct. Yes, this is the American Legion. Yes.
Councilmember Jones has a follow-up.
Yes, Eric, for those that are watching, what website would they go to if they wanted to join this American Legion post? Thank you.
Yeah, great. I was going to, now I'm recalibrating my technical issues. I was going to put all that in the chat, but it's a little lengthy. It's a Google form you just fill out with some basic information, and we'll pick it up from there.
All right. With that, we'll go to Leslie Fries with the next question.
Thanks, Etienne. Yes, Anton, how do you see cannabis and psychedelics being best utilized by veterans in the future, inside and outside the VA? And how do we get there from here?
That's a great question. I'll start with this. Cannabis legalization up until today has essentially been one big form of civil disobedience, really, at the end of the day, because of the federal illegality in the Controlled Substance Act. It really has created a whirlwind of problems. And about 3 weeks ago, I was on the Hill lobbying for some veteran legislation. And an interesting statistic that I was informed on was a normal session of Congress. They passed somewhere in the neighborhood of 355 to maybe 375 bills during a legislative session. Our current legislative session is at 42. So the reality is, in order to be able to progress with cannabis research and cannabis legalization and psychedelics, we need policy. And the reality is nothing is getting done. So not cannabis, not psychedelics, not anything really is going on at the federal level legislatively. We're in complete gridlock. So where does this fit in? I think cannabis at the state level, we have many states now who, I mean, most states are at least at a medical level. Many are at recreational. And some states have even opened up to psychedelics, be it all plant medicines, or even in the state of Michigan here, we have it decriminalized plant medicines in Detroit and Ann Arbor. So there's various spaces to where these plants are accessible. But how is it introduced to the veteran community inside the VA and out? Okay, so the reality is that cannabis, the old adage that there's no research. There's not enough research. We don't know what to do. And then when we propose research, they say no. So it's like this never-ending cycle of not being able to get the data to give to the policymakers, and the policymakers just they're not open to a lot of these different things. So I think a lot of, at the cannabis level at least, is incumbent upon us, the veteran community, the folks that are operating at an advocacy level, who are working with lawmakers, but who are also in the trenches actually working to create access to the plant. And with access, I think a big part, and I'm always a big proponent of education. And when we talk about psychedelics and plant medicines, there is sometimes a falsehood that I think of, where people will say that there's like zero risk to cannabis or psychedelics and it can't kill you and there's no way it can hurt you. And the reality is that there are certain side effects that can happen. And even if those side effects don't kill you, they might make a veteran uncomfortable and not make them want to engage with the plant any further, right? So when we talk about education, we need to educate folks. We need competent physicians and doctors and researchers like Dr. Sue Sisley, the founder of the American Legion, the American Legion Post. We need people to be able to also bring the veterans out of their shell. When we talk about at the VA level, I don't see it. I do not see it. Every conversation that I have had with VA folks, even as it pertains to medications such as ketamine, right, which is a Schedule 3 classified drug. I have personally been doing ketamine therapy since 2018. I'm very, very versed with ketamine therapy, and the VA is they make it hard to be accessible. I know in Detroit here for a long time, I don't know if it's still the case, but you had to be inpatient in order to access this particular medication, which is a well-studied medication that should be accessible to any veteran just as much as they hand out Seroquel and all the other pills, right? So when I think when we talk about the VA, I don't really think it's a thing right now. I think the VA is, at the end of the day, after dollars and cents, just like many other entities. So when there's a financial incentive to do the research, I think they'll do it. But I think a lot of the research that we see is slanted or biased a lot of times. It's not going into what benefits can cannabis have. It oftentimes goes into the bad stuff and the a lot of the information that we get is maybe not what we believe to be accurate. And when I say we, I mean the cannabis community, people who've been working with the plant for a very long time. And when we talk about psychedelics, from a VA standpoint, I mean, the VA, they're not set up to do a lot of these things because of the red tape at the federal level, right? And researching a Schedule 1 substance at any level is, I don't want to say next to impossible because it happens all the time, but it's very, very difficult. And it becomes not advantageous to the researchers to do. You really have, like Dr. Sicily, you have to love and have a passion for what you're doing, because the nightmare of dealing with the FDA and the DEA and every other entity that's trying to stonewall you is enough to pull your hair out, right? And when we talk about psychedelics, one of the most therapeutic experiences I've personally had was going off to Peru, going into the jungle and drinking ayahuasca. I mean, it took a lot of guts and pain, I would say, to be able to go into the jungle and drink a brew from, I have no idea what this was, but the therapeutic effects in the experience itself and putting trust into that was tremendously healing, right? So I can tell you personally, yes, this has helped, but how do we bring that to the masses? And especially when we talk about some psychedelics, such as ayahuasca, we have a lot of veterans who are still being over medicated by the VA. And when we take veterans who are on a lot of these mental health medications, it becomes very tricky to introduce things such as ayahuasca, because we don't want cases of serotonin syndrome and things like this to creep up, because then that just puts us back even further, because that gives the prohibitionists ammunition, right? So I think as we introduce, ayahuasca or 5-MeO-DMT, a lot of these, even psilocybin, right? A lot of these different substances that have been used for millennia, I think we need to do it in an educated fashion that is being introduced by researchers who have a passion, but who are also upfront about the potential benefits and the potential negatives. And the VA, I don't see it anytime soon. I think personally, I feel that we're at a space right now in the country where we're just legalized enough to where people aren't going to jail and research is being conducted, but we're not at the space yet to where big pharma has been able to come in and big pharma what they do. And I think that is a tricky part of legalization and research, because at the end of the day, when we talk about research, the people who have the most money ironically tend to produce the data that people are looking at, right? And that's usually big pharma. So I feel like introducing these things to the veteran community is incumbent upon the activists, but the activists need to be backed up by the scientists and the physicians, so we can have veterans out there having positive experiences. And if a substance isn't for a veteran, if they for some reason can't have ketamine because of a cardiac issue, or for some reason can't be introduced to ayahuasca for whatever reason, we want them to be educated and know that, and try and find them a particular avenue that may work for their healing journey.
Thank you for that. There's a lot to that, but thank you for breaking that down. It's again logical. We did have a question that popped up for Eryck from our Facebook. Will the Legion have smoking areas or just alcohol joints?
Yes, thank you for that question. And it has a valid point to it as well. We know historically a lot of our veteran service organizations kind of talk about their establishment with alcohol sales. There's a lot of veterans that, sit around, consume alcohol and reminisce about old stories. Personally, I'm a recovering alcoholic. I haven't had a drink in quite some time. It doesn't stop me in my own sobriety. It doesn't stop me from communicating in all the locations that are critical to do our communications, to include, various different posts. American Legion, just like other 501c3s, we are private clubs. So we have the ability to make some of our own decisions. We do follow, policy and guidelines from our leadership. And as we transition into this new cannabis space and psychedelic space, we'll be working closely. And I heard you earlier talking about doing some work locally at your American Legion. 2 years ago, we actually had the post I was attached to at the time, we did a Veterans Cannabis and Comedy event. And the only people, because of the state of Maryland, the policy and regulations, we had actually cordoned off a specific area out in the parking lot for cannabis consumption. So we all had everybody sign the mandated state disclosures. You had to be a medical patient. We went through like we were actually part of the regulatory process. We wanted to make sure people weren't sharing their cannabis. So we looked at their medical cards, looked at their medicine with their labels. We went through all the normal processes, and they consumed at the comedy event. And so as we start seeing things like that at different states, that's where it takes the collective, like-minded individuals like us, working hard in our own communities to start driving some of these, changes home. Yes, you'll still see them drinking and doing the standard conventional things. But if you look at some of the legions, I hope what you are seeing is their transition into our community, their transition into our family, and even our youth through school programming. Our American Legion Youth Nation supports programming, our auxiliary. So you'll see there's a lot more going on in our legions than just drinking. And some of the posts are starting to let that happen. I think that would have answered the question.
Yes, thank you very much for that. I have one for Anton. What research would you like to see with psychedelics if it were approved tomorrow?
Wow. What research? I think we need to have kind of a broad spectrum study. And what particular substances we'll talk, obviously, when we talk about the suicide epidemic, we need, it's hard to come up with a magic bullet, right? For me personally, I can say ketamine was as close to a magic bullet as you're going to get, as far as when it came to like suicidal thoughts and mental health and things of that nature. But is one particular substance better at targeting those in crisis than another? Is it ayahuasca? Is it psilocybin? Is it MDMA, which we're right on the cusp of getting approval for? Does one work better than the other? Is one not work in a particular group of folks? And I think until we have that kind of, everything's been pretty targeted right now. Everything is, we have MDMA and we're trying to get MDMA passed. We're talking about cannabis. We're trying to do that type of research, but a more of a kind of a broad spectrum study to maybe hone in on a particular substance, be it a plant medicine or something like a ketamine or like an MDMA. So then we can then focus more of our resources there. So we can at the very least come up with some sort of intervention. And when we come up with that intervention, the important thing is got to be accessible. So that research has to be sound enough to where we can get the policymakers and the decision makers into a space to where that substance is accessible to everybody and anybody that may be in crisis. Right now, that's not necessarily the case. I mean, ketamine therapy is outrageously expensive, and it's paid for out of, I've paid thousands of dollars out of my own pocket to have access to this medication. That is not accessible to most, right? And when we talk about cannabis, a lot of states that are just coming online right now, it's not necessarily accessible from a financial standpoint or from just purely an accessibility standpoint. Maybe they don't have their dispensary system put together. So what is that substance and how can it be used? And what are the benefits and what are the negatives? So we can come up with an approach that we can then convert into a policy choice that we can present that, God willing, on a bipartisan manner can move along, and so we can make a dent into this suicide epidemic. But I haven't heard of anything where they're looking at more than one substance at a time.
Correct. I would like to see that as well, because different people respond to different things. We've seen people respond positively through, MAPS to MDMA, but at the same time to, ketamine. But of course, they're ayahuasca, right? They're not doing anything regarding that in this particular reality, but
Nope.
we know that. We also know ibogaine, as well, should be accessible, as well as we've seen multiple people with heavy addictions, especially, you know, heavy opioids, especially, find solace in those two specific, psychedelics to help heal and bring about harmony. Leslie has a follow-up question to you as well, Anton.
Yeah, Anton, when we hear about psychedelic research with veterans, where is this being done and how is this being done?
Well, I think MAPS has really been on the forefront of a lot of the psychedelic research. I mean, Rick Doblin with MDMA, I mean, his work has been unbelievable, and he has shown that him and the MAPS organization has shown that they've been able to not only bring forward MDMA and the therapeutic effects that it could have, but also navigate all of the regulatory hurdles with the FDA, that's huge, right? So I think MAPS is on the forefront of a lot of things. But what I've noticed when we talk about like ayahuasca, it was just mentioned. We have nonprofits around. There's a nonprofit that sends veterans to Peru because it's not accessible here in the States to most. And there's all these veterans that are actually consuming it, but we're not getting that data back because it's confined to Peru, right? So I think a lot of the psychedelic consumption is still being done in a relatively underground manner. And I think that's kind of a shame because there's so much data that can be collected from this. So a lot of it is anecdotal, right? But I think what we need is not only organizations who are willing to study the psychedelics, such as MAPS, but competent researchers who are willing to stick their neck out, like Sue Sicily and Rick Doblin, who are willing to fight the system tooth and nail in order to progress with a lot of this research. So MAPS is really on the forefront. I think a lot of I mean, I believe I just heard not long ago, it was in the past week or two, that there's a breakthrough, the FDA granted breakthrough therapy to LSD or an LSD derivative. That we're starting to get to the point now to where I think after, psilocybin being granted breakthrough, all these different substances that are finally starting to get a little bit of traction. But the issue is it costs so much money to conduct this type of research with a Schedule 1 drug, right? So in what I have found in talking with researchers, nobody wants to be the one who puts the dollars on the line, right? They don't want to put their all the money on the line, and then everyone else comes in behind them and kind of benefits from the research. So I think MAPS has really been on the forefront, and I think they'll probably continue to be that way.
Let's see. Council Member Landry has a follow-up for Eryck.
Yes, Eryck, I was wondering if post 426 is going to have methods of delivery, like educational, because I meet a lot of older vets and they're getting recommendations for cannabis. They're not getting the information on how to consume the cannabis or methods of consumption and stuff. So I'm wondering if maybe if that's part of the post 426, you know, meeting profile in the future? Is it something that's going to be planned?
Thank you, Tony. I very much appreciate it. It's been a long time. And I appreciate also you allowing me to carry that personal flag of yours made of hemp on quite a few occasions. Very profound side story. Yes, what you say is critical. Without a doubt, we want to make sure our veterans are properly educated, properly dosing, even documenting and journaling, their usage through, terpene profiles, the whole educational program. I don't think we need to get into, but that is something we haven't looked at. We are just forming some of our more detailed policies and procedures that we're putting together, and consumption, education, and usage is critical. Let me take that back to our group as something we can look at. And I know that's something something that shouldn't be too hard to put together with the skill and the expertise of the staff that we have on board already, and hopefully with new folks coming online with concepts and ideas just like you shared. We always want to make sure we're covering all what we call the wickets of the work. So we'll take that back. We don't have any policy in place just yet, but we'll make sure we have it addressed at our next board meeting for a topic of discussion. And if you give me a chance, I could talk a little bit more about the psychedelic question, if there's still time at the end.
Go ahead, Eryck.
Oh, great. Yeah, thank you. So the earlier question was about psychedelics inside and outside of the VA, and some of our thoughts about utilizing it in the present and in the future. I just wanted to say, just a few weeks ago, on March 6th, our post commander, some probably know, Todd Scatini, along with Dr. Sue Sisley directly, she's a pioneer and cannabis researcher, and really the founder of our post and a lot of our work. They gave public commentary to the Veterans Administration's National Research and Development Council. That was to congratulate them for their bold move to begin researching psychedelics. And really our message to them was to urge them to move even faster and be more courageous in their work to treat our veterans who have suffered so much on the battlefield. Secondly, we talked about our resolution number 5, which specifically addresses the usage of psychedelics, supporting PTSD, TBIs, chronic pain, and all the other maladies that we're suffering. So with the resolution and with our continued activity from boots on the ground level, we'll work hard to push our programming for psychedelics as well as cannabis. And I think that resolution resonates very well.
All right. Well, thank you both very much, as I will bring it to a close here. Thank you very much to Mr. Anton Harb Jr., as well as to Eryck Stamper. I would like to thank our council members tonight: Tony Landry, Peggy Jones, Michael Krawitz, Wade Laughter, Nate Landau, and Leslie Fries, and myself, Etienne Fontan. Thank you very much for joining us for VAC Roundtable number 72, Veterans Cannabis Research with Anton Harb Jr. and American Legion Post 426. Thank you all very much, and have a great rest of your night, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.
2 weeks.